I have a question for you, and it's a deep question, and you may not know the answer, and that's okay. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Do you know the difference? Do you know why it matters? I am here today to help you crack the code on, honestly, the introverts that are in your world that many times are unspoken, and even, quite honestly, they don't even label themselves. They're just kind of the quiet leaders, right? And I'm so excited for our today's guest at CTRL+ALT+DELETE. I have to compose myself. So hint, I'm not an introvert. I think my energy is flowing through me. So lean in, everybody lean in, because Jennifer Kahnweiler Ph.D, by the way, is here. And Jennifer, you are going to give us such a gift of your knowledge and your passion today. And I just want to say thank you for being here.
You're so welcome, Lisa. It's a thrill to be here. I just love continuing the conversation with you.
Yes. Yeah. So for anyone who's wondering, if anyone is wondering how this happened, let me just tell you the magic, right? When you show up with an open heart and you're curious, but there's this topic that interests you, and then you participate in said conversation, this is what happens. I got invited to a book club because one of the people I know was interviewing Jennifer. And Jennifer, I showed up because I wanted to learn more about introversion, and I have such a passion for eradicating burnout in tech. And I know there's a lot of introverts in tech. I was like, I got to know what she's saying. Well, not only did I get to know what she was saying, I got to interact with her. I got to actually have conversation. And then from there, I was bold enough to invite you here. And I'm going to say, yay me, right? To have the courage, to have the conversation, to step into it, because man, oh man, not only have I read the book, Quiet Influence, which I'm going to hold up here, your most recent book, Creating an Introvert-Friendly Workplace. I just want to get right to it. I'm going to get quit gushing. I'm going to get the formal intro in, and then we're jumping in, because guess what? Leaders in tech need to understand, they have a moral obligation, I believe, as if they are in charge of people, to understand what makes an introvert tick, how an introvert can be successful, and what they might be doing without even knowing it that's hindering an introvert's ability to be their best selves at work. So boom, here's what I'm going to say. Jennifer Kahnweiler is the best-selling author of one of the top global leadership speakers on introverts in the workplace. Her pioneering books, The Introverted Leader, Quiet Influence, The Genius of Opposites, and Creating Introvert-Friendly Workplaces have been translated into 18 languages. The Introverted Leader was named one of the top 5 business books by the Shanghai Daily. There's just so much to unpack here. So Jennifer, tell me, why are you on this mission? Why have you spent 12 years dedicating your life to helping present the realities about what it is to be an introvert in our world?
Lisa, well, yes, as I would like to thank you for having me, and also I want you just to note, for those of you who are not seeing video, we're both wearing green, so there's something about the telepathic. Yeah,
right.
Well, yeah. And thank you for your interest in this topic. You know, the germ of this came about. I was doing a lot of work in leadership development and HR, similar worlds to you. Yeah. Being in. And the other area I was working in was technology. I worked at technology companies as a consultant and also internally. And for years, I had been sort of spreading the gospel, if you will, about learning more about ourselves. You mentioned leading others, but it's also starting, isn't it, with ourselves? Yeah. And I was married to an introvert, as I think you are as well. And I thought, if I'm gonna make this relationship work, or if we're going to need to learn about personalities. And that helped a lot. And when I started working more in these worlds of technology that I talked about, it was really apparent that a large majority of the teams that I was consulting with were made up of introverted leaders who were so incredibly, they had so many strengths, you know, in terms of empathy and listening and observation and all of the things that we now know are aligned with introversion, but yet they were not necessarily leveraging them themselves. But even more importantly, to your point, others weren't able to see that and were really ignoring them. They were forgotten, they were overlooked. oftentimes misunderstood, and it had tangible consequences, because then you would see, the person who was passed over for that opportunity, that cool project or that promotion, or even more significant, even just as significantly in hiring. People were, he's not the kind of guy I want to have a beer with, or she doesn't fit in. She seems very morose. All of these really negative impressions that were made about introverts. And, it wasn't, I'm not saying it was intentional, but it's like bias. You're an unconscious, it's going to perpetuate. So this went on for years and years. And I really jumped into this, as you say, 12 years ago, when I decided that, I was working with clients, and the old story, you didn't have a book to give them, so you write it, right?
I love it so much. Yeah.
And I have to give my kudos to the technology folks, who I still are probably my largest audience, my clients in technology, or in, organizations that have a lot of people within engineering, within, software design, AI, you name it. People that deal with data, are very oftentimes fall into the introvert side of the fence. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying, it's important for me as an extrovert to really understand personally, but also to really work in my professional life and make a difference there.
The thing that really shows up when you're talking is this curiosity that you had about improving relationships, whether it was the example you gave of your husband or your clients, the world, right? Yeah. One of the things, I think one of the gifts that you've given the world by being called to put this into writing, especially I'll just talk about the one Quiet Influence, right? Which is something I wanted to talk to you about today is, I mean, you give a framework, you give them a quiz, you showcase what's needed from an awareness standpoint, and then you tell them what to do about it. So for any listener who stumbles across this podcast, the first thing I want to say is go get the books, right? I mean, yes, have the conversation, but I mean, you've made it so easy. And I think,
thank you.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I did want to tell people there's all the book excerpts. I have really meaty excerpts on my website. So like
your website's amazing, by the way. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have all of the books there. Introverted Leader is in a second edition now. And so thank you for that. Again, technology drove that.
Well, yeah.
In terms of having a model, I was working with so many engineers, and
exactly
they were so successful. But yet, and then I would give them these ideas, and they would say, oh my gosh, that's not something that I've ever learned in school, or, that nobody's ever told me about. Like, how do I use my listening and then take that and have one-on-one conversations, all strengths of mine as examples. And then I'm able to then sell that project. Nobody put it into a framework. And so the 4 Ps was one of the models that came out of that my editor, Steve Prasante, who's an introverted CEO, said, Jennifer, you need a model. And so that kind of what you said, quiz and the model.
Exactly.
Because I'm very right brain. I'm like, oh, let's just write about it in narrative style and give cases. They say, no, the real meat. And I think the real importance is, as people are becoming more aware of how much temperament is an element, of diversity, inclusion, equity, of just successful. It used to be sort of like what we used to call, Lisa, soft skills. People used to call it.
Right. I know. Yeah.
And then we heard soft skills lead to hard results. So soft skills can actually be put in a framework that is usable.
Yeah. And when I think about this, because of course, tech engineering, formulas, I wanted to call that out right away, because when I was reading it and I was looking at it through the lens of my clients, through people that I love, friends and family, I thought, what a gift, because they're going to want to know, how do I do this? What does this mean? Because I mean, how many here's a question. How many introverts have you run across that didn't really even know that they had this temperament? They were just walking around thinking, well, I'm not influential, or I'll never be the CEO, or, there's like a lot of
tons.
It's self-doubt, extra pressure, and seeing that society's view of success and leadership is like the gregarious salesperson who walks in the room and commands the attention, right? But it's the quiet leaders that I think right now are going to change. I think they're the foundation to changing the game, to creating high-performing teams.
We still have a ways to go, though. I mean, that's the challenge. And that's why I wrote the last book around workplaces and culture, because we've had introverts step into their power more. The introverts are owning who they are. And that's beautiful to see. I mean, you have, now there's all these introvert coaches. People actually talk about it. I was on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, and Dharmesh Shah, who was the one of the latest billionaires who sold HubSpot, is mentioned in his first line and announcing it in LinkedIn. It caught my attention, Lisa, because he said, a poor boy, I'm paraphrasing, from a small Indian village who's an introvert. And that's a big shift that we see, because when I first started this work in the very beginning years, when I was doing research, I had a hard time even getting people to, talk to me. But part of it is, like you said, people weren't aware, even though like us were, we knew about assessments like the Myers-Briggs and everything. So we kind of had that insight, but people weren't aware. And when they were aware, they saw it as pejorative, like it was a negative.
Absolutely. This is what I think is yes, there's a long way to go. And how I'm just so excited that the conversations are happening, the awareness is happening. And when I think about one of the things I wanted to talk to you specifically about today, because of course, burnout is rampant in tech. We have situations where I believe mental health crisis right now is actually going to cause us to not be innovative. Like, we're going to miss that next big idea, right? And what I know, in being married to an introvert, parenting an introvert, and loving many introverts in my life, that there's a tremendous opportunity here to create the space for all of these voices to get to be presenced and to be shared, because a lot of the ideas that come from the introvert temperament are brilliant, but they can be missed so simply. So on top of burnout and people just going day to day and everything just so hectic, I'm just curious, this is where I want to get practical. What insights can you share about what burnout in an introvert might look like or feel like, so that we can raise awareness to that? And then what do you know? I don't want to say what advice do you have, but what are some steps that people could take to actually close that gap?
Well, let's maybe just go back a little bit to the baseline understanding, just that I'm talking from, or kind of how I'm defining this. Right, because introversion is really about energy, right? And it's also about stimulation. We've learned that kind of introvert 2.0, as we've learned more about this whole concept. There's been all this brain research. So dopamine comes into the picture. So how much introverts don't need as much dopamine as extroverts do. Now, extroverts get their energy from being out with people. It doesn't mean that introverts don't like people. They're great with people and they have wonderful, deep relationships. But it's all about stimulation. So when you talk about burnout, if you know any introverts, and all of us do, because 40 to 60% of the population is introverted, you don't have to go very far. You don't have to ask them many questions to say, what's going on with you right now? You can see when they shut down. And when do they shut down? It's when it's too much stimulation. When there've been with meetings, Zoom meetings back to back. When there've been, you've been at a party, that's one of the anathemas, like, don't put me in a social cocktail party, right? Too many people coming at you. And it's what we know now, it's that overstimulation of the brain. So one example with Bill, again, I'll use him because, I'll come home from a business trip, which I hope we're starting again now, right? I will go in the kitchen and there'll be the smooth jazz playing. The lights are really low. And, and I'll go, hey, Bill. And I'll just, like, not even thinking, turn the lights on. My voice is very loud. And he almost physically is like, pushing his hands back, because it's, depending on what kind of, not all introverts are like that, but you can physically see it with the introverts in your life. And they may not share that with you because they feel the pressure and I say a lot of women in tech have experienced this, to be sociable and to be friendly. And, I remember Sophia Demling, who's a writer who writes about this, said to me, I had company over and I finally just grabbed my laptop. I just wanted to be alone, and I left the group and I just walked away. And so she said, I was going to go crazy if there was any more conversation. Like
Mhm.
it's just too much. So related to burnout, think about that exponentially at work, tons of conversations, it's coming from all sides. What can people do about that? Well, I think the answer sort of bubbles up when we think about that. Taking quiet time is the most important, as you say, asset, but all of these on steroids can become liabilities. So if you do not take that quiet time, you'll shut down. We all have to work that in. Extroverts too need it, but it's just a degree. Weren't you saying that, Lisa, when you were looking at the quiz before?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think was such a awareness moment for me. So my husband, same music, same type of thing. Sometimes I'm like, why are we listening to classical music? Like, I want to go hear Bruno Mars as an example. And he just looks at me, he's like, then I can't be in the car. Like, I just need, like, it's like, take it down a notch, like mellow, whatever that is. And I used to think like I was too much.
Right.
Right.
Well,
So
you
the message I was
probably are
getting,
sometimes.
yeah, but the message I was getting was like, wow, here's Lisa, right? And he's just like, shh, right? And I realize now when I think about the nervous system and your brain, and when you say talk about stimulation, what a gift it would be for your entire team to just, invite the conversation about, how no, you're not going to say how overstimulated you are. I would be like, how much room you got for conversation right now? This is how I would talk. Dude,
Yeah.
can you handle 20 minutes or is 10 good? Like, what can we do to like meet you where you are? That's one thing. But one of the things that I realized for myself in reading the book, because I thought, well, I'll just take it as myself, not label myself introvert or extrovert, right? And in the book, my scores, which full transparency, right? The quiet time just showed up over and over to me. Like, basically, I think it was, you have work to do. My score was 9.
Yeah.
Right. And I think 9 in that zone, it says moderate. You have some work to do in developing this strength. Right. And then you give examples of what to do. And I thought to myself, don't we all need a break in between a meeting? Don't we all need a minute to like capture our thoughts before we go to the next meeting? Like some of this stuff is so basic. I don't even know that it has to be introvert or extrovert labeled. It's honestly just best practice in, energy management. And then I put myself in the shoes of the introvert and go, yeah, double that one, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where my head went.
Well, it's interesting. One company I'm working with, a very large financial services company, they scheduled a meeting for me a few weeks ago. That was it ended at like 4:25. And I was like, is something wrong with the invite? And then I realized they're giving people at least 5 minutes. Well, wouldn't you know, I've had 2 meetings since that time. The introverts show up early, right?
Yeah.
Extroverts come running in the last minute and they're out of breath. They're not prepared. And I'm I don't mean to diss on the extroverts, but this is what happens when you don't have time, when you think you can squeeze in everything. And that's just exhausting. So, we need that. The other thing that that relates to what you were talking about is writing. That's another strength. And as you know, in the Quiet Influence book, we looked at, the question that I asked there was, how do you make a difference as an introvert? Like, how do you do it your way? Because when you stop trying to be an extrovert, that's when you are successful, when you do it your way. So what were the 6 key strengths that people use to provoke new ideas, provocative thinking, to create changes, to inspire others, all of the things where you make a difference across an organization. You don't necessarily have to be a leader in charge of people. But that coming back to what I was saying earlier, these tech folks oftentimes have to do that, right? They're managing multiple projects. So they have to influence. So how do you do this without exhausting yourself? There were 6 key strengths we identified, and one of them was taking quiet time. That was the foundational one. Like without that, forget it. The second one was preparation. And that's the ace in the hole for introverts, because my point about the meeting, getting there early, having an agenda, good meeting hygiene, just really knowing what the questions are that you have. What you did for this interview, Lisa, was very introvert friendly because you were ready, you were prepared, and you're so much more productive that way.
Honestly, isn't that true? I know.
Productive, and introverts do that really well. Now, every strength that we found also had a negative if you do too much of it. Any overuse of a strength is a weakness.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Overuse of a strength is a weakness. So overuse of a preparation we've all done that analysis paralysis. You're just like preparing. You can't even be in the moment because you're thinking, oh, what didn't I do? Or what, and so I'm just a wreck. And that creates a lot of stress. So those were a couple of things. Writing was another key strength. And to your point about burnout, you don't always have to talk about stuff. And I think some of the tools that we have now that's asynchronous, the extroverts will stop.
I'm laughing.
The complaints we had all the time in the last research was people just stopping by my area, like work. And so we had overwhelmingly positive feedback about remote work because that was one of the reasons, interruptions. So allow me to focus, allow me to do things. Another thing we do as an introverts is writing their thoughts, expressing themselves that way, and then also making a difference that way. So listening to people, hearing, synthesizing, not saying a lot in the meeting, but kind of we've all seen players like that, right? Great team players.
Yeah.
Just put the others, everybody's talking kind of like the, what are they talking? The wild geese. And then the blue herring kind of swoops down and just kind of sums it all up in a beautiful way. And that's done in writing too, because so people will have a chance to kind of look over the pitch or the, position paper.
Yeah. I think that's
project management, like a straw, they used to call a straw man. It should be a straw person. So everybody came back to the writing. So these are just some examples of how introverts, I was so impressed by, and I continue to be, how when introverts are on their game, they're really leveraging these.
Yeah. And if I'm going to pull it through for what you said, one of the things I think, as a leadership coach, executive coach, speaker, right? What I've noticed when I facilitate team meetings and I put people in small groups, if I don't tell them the question ahead of time, it really sends the introverts into like, I have to be in this small conversation. There's not gonna be a bunch of talking. I gotta be on. And if I don't prepare them, it feels like it's causing more stress.
Yeah.
So if I will say, hey, in about 3 minutes, we're going to get together and this is what you're going to talk about. Take a minute to get your thoughts together. And then they go in then they come back out and they're like, that was so energizing. And their teammates are like, I didn't know you could be energized by a conversation, right? But I'm realizing that what I'm modeling and creating in that experience for these groups that we're running is we're making it almost introvert friendly. Totally. And I'm thinking, right? And so when I think about burnout, and I think about the impact of burnout on an introvert, I guess my double dog dare for anyone listening is to think about how you can do the smallest things to leverage what Jennifer's talking about, which is leveraging the opportunity for them to write, creating quiet time for all of you, right? Giving them prep time. And I say them, we all need prep time.
We all do.
Spoiler alert, you working at midnight is not doing you any good either. Just because you can doesn't mean it's good. You might have, could be more prepped.
Okay, let me give you another training tip. I know you had to I know you had another question, I think, but we were trying to get some practical ideas.
I love it. Yeah, let's be practical.
Brought me back into the classroom, and which is such a cool place to really see people kind of come into their own when we're together. It's also in the Zoom room. But one of the things that's helpful too is if you have them in those groups, and I love that you give them the question ahead. When they're talking and then you want to do the debrief, right? You have or this could be for those of you running meetings, right? Right. You want to debrief and you ask, if you don't do this, you're going to get the people that are more comfortable talking and you're not going to hear from the others. So if you kind of walk around and you hear, or you can do this on Zoom too, because you can jump into the breakouts, right? And then hear what's going on. You could then say, do you mind, Lisa, that's a great comment you just made. Would you mind if I ask you when we're in the larger group to just share that? You're like, oh yeah, sure. Okay. Right. And you're giving them a chance and you're not just like, Lisa, what do you think?
It's almost like an interruption, right? If you don't give them the runway to just take 3 deep breaths and the magic that comes out. Like my husband is one of the most brilliant engineers on the planet. And boy, I would never have known that if I didn't settle into it and be very curious. And so I think what I'm hearing from you, first of all, get the book, everybody. The books, there's 4 of them. I'm not kidding.
You're my best press agent.
I'm just saying. Okay. The second thing is, be curious. Right. And what I'm hearing you say is knowing that these strengths are in the quiet time, in the writing, and in the preparation, I almost want to say be more like an introvert. So to avoid burnout.
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. We're not, another thing I didn't talk about in terms of concepts with this, it's a spectrum, Lisa, right? So it's
Right.
not, you're not, most of us are kind of clustered towards the middle. Like if you think about it as a bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
we're not, there's people that are outliers who are flaming extroverts.
Yeah.
You have introverts who are like hermits, which are but that's not the norm. The
Mm-hmm.
norm is for most of us to kind of move back and forth. So one of the things we learned in the pandemic, a lot of extroverts learned this, is that they really started to appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to, right? Being by
Yeah, that's true for me.
and in their heads and tapping into that, exploring just being quiet. One told me yesterday, she goes, I always said I wanted to read more. And she goes, I was forced to read more and I love it. And I'm not going to go back. I'm going to take that quiet time and read. I love it. I tapped into people say I tapped into old pursuits that I had. If you had the luxury of doing that, not all of us do, but so I think we have to realize that if we do tap into that other side, that is going to make us more well-rounded. In fact, Carl Jung, who came up with the whole concept of introversion, he said that in the second half of life, we tap into the other side. He used different terms, but he said we go to that side more. So we're more holistic. Nobody is like just one dimensional. And I'm sure for you too, you have found and people say as they get older, they're not running around as much and they like to sort of retreat and think about things. And it's very cool to be able to be more well-rounded that way.
Yeah. And I really want to, for the sake of this interview, which I hope there's a part 2 and a part 3. I mean, we could do this once a month and I would love it. But what I want to say is the thing that is showing up in everything we've talked about today is, in my mind, elevating the fact that we have a little bit of all of it in us.
Yeah.
Whether it's not like I'm only extrovert and I'm only introvert and we're against each other. It's like the blend and presencing both sides and being in the flow of what matters most in that moment. And that from a burnout standpoint, just recognizing where the energy comes from and what stimulation, whether it's noise, pressure, input, emails, like all that kind of stimulation can really weigh heavily on someone who has the temperament more in the introversion zone, right? But fundamentally, we all can benefit from this conversation.
Yeah,
it's just a beautiful,
absolutely.
Beautiful moment in time right here.
No, you're a beautiful you're a beautiful summarizer. I've loved listening to your other videos and
thank you.
Kind of bring things together like that. But you did, one of your initial questions in this discussion was around as leaders. And I really think it's important. I think all of us can lead and do lead, but I think it's important that we look within first before, and then we can set, once we know what our proclivities are, where we're strong, where we're not, and as you said, the second thing we talked about was the team and discussion. Bringing this up is very powerful because you make it safe for people to really open up about what they need. I had just a quick anecdote. I remember being in a session I was facilitating, and this group of young women came together. They worked in the same HR area, and it came out when we were having some frank discussions that they were very upset with one of their team members because she didn't go to lunch. And they made all of these, oh my gosh, stories up that you couldn't even believe about her. And it started to really become a very, very much of a judgment about her. And it wasn't going in a good direction. And then she just told them, she turned them, she said, I like each one of you. I like spending time with you. I just need that time during the day, or I'm not going to be good to anybody in the afternoon. And they were totally shocked. I mean, it was like they had never talked about the elephant in the room.
Yep.
So I think those kind of conversations are so critical to have. It's, we spend so much time talking about the task and the project and the goals. And you say that leads to burnout because then you feel like you're never doing enough. But do we really talk about, do leaders open up the discussion about what's working for you in terms of the environment and how we're setting this up? And I think in a healthy way, a lot of those discussions have had to happen as we start to think, as we're starting to move back into new work situations. Leaders have had to have those conversations. And through the pandemic, I think the better companies really were encouraging that to reach out to people and have one-on-one connection. And in those discussions, we talk about we open up, we talk about what's going on with us, but also what we need to be effective. And what do you need to be effective? And,
Totally.
isn't that so critical?
Well, I would, this is the last question I'm going to say, so I can set the tone for closing us out here. But in the hybrid world that is now coming, this flexible world, like whatever's next, my highest hope is that leaders pause and don't just think it needs to be the way it always was because it was working, because it wasn't working as well as you think, by the way. But what is really needed for your team to be a high performing team? And it's exactly what you're talking about, which is curiosity and asking, what do you need? What's working? What could make it better? How could we support you? Like it's really about caring about the humans that you're honestly blessed to be leading.
Yeah.
So this is what I think is coming next.
And you having been in HR, Lisa, for so long too, right? You were in that. I mean, it's not just HR's job to do that.
This is not HR's job. No, every leader, if you're in charge of people, it's your job. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I've loved this conversation. I know there's so much more to unpack. I want to honor our time for what we have today. And I have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
Number 1, when it comes to, I'm going to ask it differently. It's either raising your energy so you can move through, like when we need to rally, or if it's being Zen and like finding that quiet time. Whatever song comes to mind, what would you add to our playlist, whether it's an energizer or like a reflection, quiet space? What song shows up?
One song, the song that shows up as I think about it right now is Respect, Aretha Franklin.
I love this.
We need to play songs on here when the person has it.
To me. R-E-S-P.
I'm not going to try singing, but I'm
I
love
it.
Aretha, I don't know, something goes through my whole body.
Yes.
I had a chance to see her a year or 2 before she passed, and it was just, I'll never forget that performance. It just stays with you. The hearing her chills. You love it too.
I'm already dancing to it because the thing that you just gave us, which is so cool, is it's a high vibe song with a message about respecting all of our individual needs, respecting the conversation, respecting that overstimulation is not leading to high performance. It's so good.
And also the subtext there is women. For me.
Of course it is for women. Yeah. Listen, I'm so sorry. That's like the basic.
Well, no, I love what you
call that. And then what happens for me is I like see all the connections. Yes, absolutely. Jennifer, I love it.
Last week, and then I'll let you. We played. They asked me what song we should play to bring everybody in, and it was a Paula Abdul song, "Genius Opposites." It was called "Opposites Attract." Right? Opposites.
Oh, you and me together, baby. Opposites attract.
But everybody just grooving on the screen, and
cool.
That's a tip before we close out here. Think about using music as
every time
just to relax people. You're talking about burnout.
Yeah, I love it.
We'll riff some more, and there's definitely going to be a part 2. So I hope.
Well, I'm grateful for the part 2 because I want to honor your time and what's going on in your world. But last question is, if people want to find you, what's the best way? I mean, I was lucky enough to be in a book club.
I love to link in with people. I'm on LinkedIn, Lisa, as you know.
Yep.
Jennifer Kahnweiler, but my website is full of a lot of resources for people. So as I mentioned, you can download chapters to all my books, tons of articles and videos, and and just welcome to my world. And it's really the theme of harnessing introvert talent in all of our workplaces.
I'm so forever grateful that I said yes to that book club. Thank you for this time,
Lisa.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so important.
It's a delight. Thank you for spreading the word as well, and for doing the fabulous work that you do.
Oh, it's an absolute honor. Now I'm going to go play Respect and Opposites Attract. And here's the double dog dare for everybody. Just tap into yourself, figure out what you need, and go have that conversation with one other person today. It's a gift to you both. All right. Make it a great day, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Lisa.